All right, so in this video, we are focusing on solving the quadratics by factoring. So Roman numeral 1 is solving by factoring. So what we're going to do is we have number 1, x squared plus x minus 6. And the one thing you want to make sure that you have when you factor this is that you set it equal to 0. And then you are utilizing the idea of figuring out what multiplies to a times c, and it has to add to the b term. So we are, in this case, going to multiply -6 times 1, and we get -6x squared, right? So you're multiplying the a and the c term. And then you are adding to the b term, which is 1x. So we can figure out those numbers to be a positive 3x and a negative 2x. So what you're going to do with those numbers, remember we've learned already how to factor, but this is just a real quick review. You're replacing those with the two numbers that you found. You're replacing the middle term with the two numbers that you found. And so now you've created 4 terms so that you can actually group them. So you're going to focus on the first 2 and pull out the GCF. Check your work by redistributing. And then the second 2 also pulling out the GCF, which in this case is -2. And you should know if you're on the right track because these two guys should match. And if they don't match, then you've got a problem. So what you're going to do now is combine the pair of x plus 3's, and then you have x minus 2. Remember that it is set equal to 0. So what you're going to do is take each factor and set each one of those equal to 0 and solve. So in this case, you would get x equals -3 or x equals +2. And so what that just simply means is that if you were to have a quadratic, it would have x-intercepts at these 2 specific spots. Now, we could go a little bit further. We don't have any additional, well, we could graph it if we wanted to, but that's not the intent. The intent is to understand that the solutions represent x-intercepts, and if I wanted to plot more points, I could. So let's take a look at number 2, and we have x squared minus 9. The directions say solve by factoring. So remember, I've got to multiply my -9 times 1x squared. So I need to find two numbers that multiply to -9x squared and add it to 0x, because essentially what you have is no middle term. So the only way to multiply to -9x squared and to add to 0 would be like a -3x and a +3x, so that you get -9x squared and then you get 0. So I'm rewriting the middle term as -3x, +3x, and then -9 equals 0. I'm going to continue to group. They both have an x in common, so I'd have x minus 3. This has a 3 in common, so I'd have x minus 3. I know I'm on the right track because I have the same x minus 3's. And then remember, here at this point, you are pulling the leftover. So I have an x, and this really was a +3. So we really want to make sure that we pull a plus or a minus sign in front of that. And so you would, from here, set each factor equal to 0 and solve. So we would get x is equal to 3 or x is equal to -3. So let's take a look at number 3. We're going to factor this. I would need to multiply what two numbers multiply to 36x squared and adds to 15x. Well, that would be 9x and 4x. So then I'm going to rewrite the 15 as these two numbers. So I've got 4x squared plus 4x. I'm just putting this 4x over here just because I noticed that the 4 is there, but it really doesn't matter which side you place it. And so we've got the 4x's in common, so I'd have x plus 1. I've got a positive 9 in common and an x plus 1. So I take my plus 1s, that becomes its own factor, and then I have 4x plus 9, and again it equals 0. So I'm setting each one of those, x plus 1 equals 0, and 4x plus 9 equals 0. So you would get x is equal to -1. And then if you were to go through and you would subtract 9 and divide by 4, you would get -9/4. So I would like you to try this particular problem, -3x cubed minus 5x squared minus 2x equals 0. So pause the video and try to factor and solve. Okay, so the first thing I would hope that you recognize is that each one of these guys has an x. So when you, in fact, they even have a negative in common, and we can always factor out a negative x. So if I were to do that, I would actually have 3x squared. I would have a positive 5x, and I would have a positive 2, and it would set equal to 0. So I also am not done necessarily, because although I have a negative x out front, I could check to see if I could factor that. So again, using the factoring technique of multiplying to a times c and adding to 5x here, you could see that that would be what, 3x and 2x, that multiplies to 6x squared and it adds to 5. So really what I'm doing here is grouping this, just replacing those two numbers that I found. And then now I'm going to group them and simplify that. So if I were to take a look at that, I would have 3x and then x plus 1 plus 2x plus 1. So the entire factors would be my negative x that I originally started with, x plus 1, because they both have x plus 1, and then I'd have 3x plus 2 as my leftovers. And remember, it equals 0. So you have actually 3 sets of factors. Negative x is equal to 0, or x plus 1 is equal to 0, or 3x plus 2 is equal to 0. And so you can see if you were to solve for x here, x would equal to 0, x would be equal to -1, or x would be equal to -2/3. And so those would be your 3 final solutions.